Happy politics, and welcome back to another fun-filled edition of BC Poly Hot Stove. I'm your host, Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I am joining you live from the old rock pile, the BC legislature, hence the tie. And I am joined in a socially distant manner by
Jordan Bateman. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. And Maclean, I'm going out on a construction site visit after this. So, I've got my hard hat ready, my steel-toed boots. It's like I'm doing real work instead of just blathering on as usual.
Which is also real work, he said a tad defensively.
Punditry is not real work. I'm sorry to tell you that.
And speaking of real work, obviously we missed last week, Canada Day, and also you took a well-deserved week off. So, I mean, we don't have the consecutive streak that Unspun does. It's yet another thing they can, beat us over the head with.
Yes, well, British Columbia was incredibly rainy last week, so I apologize for scheduling my vacation that week and probably screwing over with my bad luck a lot of other people. However, we did get out to a lake on the Monday. By Canada Day, we were terribly depressed as a family. You can only make jokes so long, like, what are you going to do today? Well, I'm going to visit the garage. I'm going to tour the basement and see how that's going. But later on this month, I think we're going to try to sneak away to the Penticton area, which will be a lot more fun and hopefully a lot more sunny.
I hope so as well. And
my whining, I'll be doing a different kind of whining when I'm in Penticton than the kind I just did.
And speaking of something we would have definitely talked about last week, the week before was the first week that session was back. And the big issue, of course, was, well, is everyone going to get fired? By law. The ICBA, your organization, was a signatory to a letter that went to the Premier's office saying that, listen, you've got to extend the deadline for layoffs before people are fired by law and then be paid severance. And it kind of got tossed around for a couple days. Is a happy ending. I guess we can skip. We don't want to skip ahead, but explain sort of your point of view during that very turbulent week.
Yeah, look, it had been actually a weird couple of weeks leading up to that, where the business groups had very quietly and respectfully gone to the Minister of Labour and said, listen, you need to change this. Essentially what happened was, in BC, there's a law that says after 13 weeks on EI, after 13 weeks of being laid off, the employee is automatically terminated and therefore subject gets severance payments. That was extended to 16 weeks at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. And then other governments, every other government across the country, including the federal government, extended it out to as much as 6 months because trying to give businesses as much opportunity as possible to find their feet and put their teams back together. Except in British Columbia, where Harry Baines decided this was his line in the sand and he was not going to cross it. And by golly, he fought to hold it to 16 weeks, which would have triggered a number of terminations starting this week, put businesses in a really bad spot where, like, pick your poison. Do you want to go bankrupt bringing staff back that you don't quite need yet or have nowhere for them to work? Or do you want to go bankrupt by paying them out severance? Not really a smart thing. The Liberals, BC Liberals, did a great job in question period. I mean, they hammered and hammered and hammered. As you wrote a piece for the Orca about very compelling case. And finally, John Horgan basically waved the white flag on Thursday and said, no, we're going to switch this over. He claimed it was after a call with business groups. That call was actually a call with a number of people, including the BC Federation of Labour, which is still gnashing its teeth over this. It wasn't just the business groups, but whatever. Premier saves a little bit of face, but most importantly, we're not seeing businesses terminate thousands and thousands of British Columbia employees today.
Well, as you pointed out, I mean, this is not a radical, untested idea. The rest of the country, including the federal government, had already done the same. I mean, we are in extraordinary times. Yeah. And I've seen some pieces, I'm not sure from the BC Federation of Labour, but I read a piece in the Tyee saying, well, all the workers are getting screwed. Well, it seemed to me like
everyone's getting screwed. Yeah. Everybody's getting screwed. It's COVID. No one is making out well here. Maybe Jeff Bezos.
There's no plot.
Maybe Jeff Bezos is making out. Everyone else is being screwed. There's no plot. There's no evil thing here. Small business owners aren't like, oh yeah, my employees are still on furlough. Woo, No, they desperately want to bring their teams back. Think of the event catering company. So, one of my weird sideline life gigs is, doing marriages. So we, my wife and I, we've married a few hundred couples over the past 15 years. So, a lot of these event caterers, they can't cater any events. And so, they have these teams that they've put together and they desperately want to hold them together as long as possible. But it's not like these small business owners are like, I can, screw over my employees by keeping them laid off for longer, keeping them on the CERB longer. No, of course not. So, the Federation of Labor's got to get their, head out of the sand. It is funny to me that the NDP and the Federation of Labor will always say, we're in this together, but not when it actually comes to, the small business owners, they're not in it with it. Like, come on, we're either in this all together or we're not. And everyone's going to have to bend a little bit in order to try to get the economy back on track.
The sense I had watching it in real time was that Horgan was trying to say without saying, yes, it's going to happen. But under no circumstances am I giving you, people asking me this over and over and over again, any credit for it. I'm going to do this because I'm going to do it on my own damn time, basically. Yeah. When he was always going to do it, I think. That was my take anyway.
Yeah, so why not just come out and say it? Like, just Monday say, you know what, I'm going to review this tonight. And then Tuesday, first thing, boom, you know what, I don't love it, but we're going to do it. Like, it was petulant. It was petulant Horgan, and it didn't make a lot of sense. Like, we all knew he was going to do it. Afterwards, I tweeted out, look, when you can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. That's a great Ronald Reagan quote. They start, the BC Liberals, ICBA, the Business Council of British Columbia, the CFIB, like, they made these guys feel the heat. But, move away from the fire, John. Like, you know what you're going to do. The Premier knows he's going to have to cave on this, like every other government in the country. I don't understand why he decided to prolong the bleeding, but in the end, the correct decision was made. I think he's robbed himself of any political credit for that. I think, in the business community, I can tell you most of the credit goes to the BC Liberals and these group associations for fighting the good fight on this. It's not like Horgan's getting a lot of credit for what he, should have come to over the weekend.
Yeah, well, you could have done exactly what you said. You're right. I'm going to review this. It is important. It is a pressing issue. Yeah. And then the next day, just sort of quietly done it. Oh well.
Totally. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go out of this meeting today, and I'm going to call the Business Council of British Columbia or one of the signatories, the CFIB. I'm going to call them this afternoon and find out, if their point of view, and then trigger it. Like it was a self-inflicted wound. And the problem for Horgan is that, there was this really kind of BS union-funded poll put out that shows the NDP are like 25 points ahead of the BC Liberals.
I saw that.
Which is just the most ridiculous thing ever. And, they don't release any of the tables. They don't release the sequencing, which you can just picture, right? Do you think Adrian Dix has done a good job saving everyone's life? Do you think John Horgan's done a good job saving everyone's life? Aren't you glad you're not? You can just see the sequencing, right? And then who do you support? John Horgan's NDP or, these other guys? Like,
or Attila the Hun.
Yeah, exactly. And, come on. Like, no one buys that. Trust me, if the NDP thought they were 25 points ahead, we'd be in an election campaign right now. So,
I agree with that.
But, I'm very keenly aware of the idea that very rarely do opposition parties win power. Governments generally defeat themselves. And we see it over and over again in Canadian history and British Columbia history. Governments, self-inflicted wounds, and they kind of bleed out and that's the end. This was a major self-inflicted wound by the Horgan government. They didn't have to do it. They made it, by being obstinate, they made it a bigger deal than it probably should have been. And, it's an interesting step forward. I think there's other ones. I think ICBC is another self-inflicted wound, gouging young drivers. And now it's starting to come around like, wait a minute, you're gouging young drivers, thousands and thousands of dollars to insure $5,000 vehicles. Plus, under no fault, if there's an accident and they're hit by some idiot, you're going to basically relegate these kids to being paupers the rest of their life and fully dependent on ICBC. That does not sound like a great, like what are they paying these high premiums for if not to get proper care? So that's going to be another self-inflicted wound. Prop rep back in the day was a self-inflicted wound. Like this, they start to stack up on governments, and Justin Trudeau is a different kind of politician where there's no dimmer switch. It's off and on, right? Like, you love Trudeau until you don't and the light clicks off. Every other politician in the country, including John Horgan, it's a dimmer switch.
That's true.
This gets a little dimmer on the Horgan leadership file. Certainly it's a lot dimmer on Harry Baines, who just looks silly in this. So anyways, it's a self-inflicted wound. They didn't have to do it. In the end, we got what we wanted. It's better for small business. The right decision was made, but I don't know what. I can't understand the political calculus behind this.
And speaking of issues that haven't gone away, well, actually, there's a number of ways I could go after saying that. But I want to talk about two. The first one, a Supreme Court ruling this week. It was they refused to hear an appeal from, I guess, another collection of indigenous groups against the TransMountain expansion, and effectively saying, in fact, not effectively, literally saying that free, prior, and informed consent does not equal a veto. It feels like we've seen this movie before. Didn't this already happen?
Yeah, it's like Battlestar Galactica. All this has happened before, Maclean. All this will happen again. No, Vaughn Palmer had a great piece in The Sun today, kind of laying out, exactly what was in the court decision. When the NDP, cut the sweetheart deal with the Green Party in order to seize power, the whole idea was there were a few things that they had to deliver. One of them was, obstinate opposition to the TransMountain pipeline. Every tool in the
toolbox. Yeah.
And how many times did we hear that gag-inducing cliche? And it turns out, as Rachel Notley, great NDP premier in Alberta, noted, their toolbox turned out to be Fisher-Price, right? Like there was no actual heft within the tools they had, and we all knew it. Unfortunately, they spent hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars, the Horgan NDP trying to, fight this unwinnable fight. And now, we come out with a court decision which actually will, probably cause, a lot of consternation in the Indigenous community that, they're trying to, bring into the fold. So I'm not sure what they gained out of it besides power. I mean, obviously they gained power, but not sure they've gained anything since. And, now court challenges seem to have all run their course. TransMountain should proceed, we believe will proceed, must proceed in this COVID, post-COVID recovery or interim COVID recovery where you've got to find ways to put people to work. But, the First Nations, those last two or three who are fighting this to the bitter end, like they were hinting of blockades and other problems that are going to come back and land on the NDP's doorstep again. And it wasn't that long ago where we had the Unistoten, Wet'suwet'en folks barricading the legislature where you are. The legal notices are still on the doors of the legislature, preventing them from coming back, preventing them from entering the building. The injunctions. We may see that again.
I kind of think we will. I mean, it does feel inevitable, and it's funny. I went back and reread some of the older pieces on not just that I've written, but people like Vaughn Palmer on this file. And one of the things we've forgotten is that soon after being elected, the NDP received legal advice saying actually threatening every tool in the toolbox is illegal. You can't do that. If once it's been approved and you can go through legal challenges, but once those legal challenges are exhausted, that's it. And we've kind of forgotten that they persisted in this for a while, that they threatened, we'll bleed it to death with permitting and that kind of thing. That was always an illegal threat. This was so much has happened in the years since that we've forgotten what a big deal this was.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Weaver, I remember him vividly on CBC television. I believe Zussman was still at CBC at the time. And, he said to him, what about this TransMountain? He's like, we have to fight it any way we can. And, BC has control over permitting and maybe those permits don't get issued, huh? And it was such a godfather, like, maybe you wake up with a horse head next to you. I don't know. And it was like Dr. Weaver at his worst. Like, Andrew Weaver's been proven to be a much more talented politician than a lot of people thought he would be. This was Dr. Weaver's worst, essentially suggesting illegal means to prevent it.
And he wasn't alone. He wasn't alone.
And the NDP jumped on it. Like George Heyman, the Minister of Environment, there was a lot of permits that took suspiciously long. I'm sure they still don't have all the permits they need for across the province. It's been years. Like, get on with it. Embracing that kind of, it's not right. Like, this was a project, when you go back, like it was approved by the National Energy Board, approved by Cabinet, approved by two different governments in diametrically opposed governments in Ottawa. Eventually had to be bailed out by the federal government because it took too long, and Trudeau has only himself to blame for that, but whatever. Like, something like 95% of the First Nations along the way either signed support or, kind of like compliance agreements with it, like they were okay with it. All the municipalities came on board. Like, almost everyone came on board except for this small group of people who, happen to have the levers of power and the purse strings in Victoria. So, It's a shame. It should have been started a long time ago, but we're grateful now from a construction point of view. Construction is starting this summer. There's going to be men and women working on the site, building this thing, and it's going to be very important, especially in an era where Maclean, east coast of Canada needs gas, needs oil, and instead of just reversing the flow on an existing pipeline called Energy East and sending it there, we're instead going to ship it out of Vancouver, down the west coast of the United States, past Mexico, past the Baja, all the way through the Panama Canal, pay a fortune every time you put a tanker through there, then up through the Caribbean, all the way around Florida, and past New York, wave to New York City, folks, and then into Nova Scotia. Like, it's crazy that this is how we're transporting the oil. We need more of these pipelines, and you have an existing one, Energy East, but it does guarantee that TransMountain will be full for many, many years to come.
I have 3 different perfect segues into the next thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
Issues that won't go anywhere. You mentioned construction, and you mentioned the purse strings in Victoria, and you're already smiling. And you actually are the perfect man to talk about this. Highway project. It's been reduced in scope. This is the widening of the Trans-Canada. It's been reduced in scope, and yet it's costing $61 million more. And we have a pretty good idea why.
Yeah, so there's long-term promise. Both the BC Liberals and the NDP have made it to essentially 4-lane Highway 1 from Kamloops all the way to the U.S. border, or the Alberta border.
Yeah.
Long-standing promise. Everyone wants it. They've been working on it forever. The mayor's they desperately want this done. Okay, great. So it's expensive. There's no doubt about it. Like, this is some pricey road construction. Some of it's very complicated and technical, but all of it's been budgeted out. And the NDP have taken so long to do it. The delays have added costs, but more importantly, they slapped on this union-only monopoly on that stretch of highway, and this has just shot prices through the roof because you have fewer bidders. 85% of construction workers can't work on the project because they're not unionized by the 19 building trades unions that happen to give John Horgan's NDP $2.5 million in campaign donations during the early part of this century. They're excluded from it. So all these costs are going up. Plus, the companies that are bidding on it are pricing in incredible amounts of risk because they know dealing with the NDP is an issue and dealing with these labor groups is an issue. So all the costs are going up. And in response, the Ministry of Transportation is doing what they can do to try to make it seem palatable. They're cutting the scope of these projects. So, a 9-kilometer stretch of highway becomes a 4.5-kilometer stretch of highway for more money than the 9-kilometer would cost. And Todd Stone has done a great job on this, former transportation minister, standing out there and saying, look, we're paying more for less. Like, it doesn't make sense. And this is just classic NDP ideology. It's classic political, pay off your friends and insiders. It's all that stuff that we all loathe, removing fair and open bidding, like all those kind of principles that all of us loathe. But most importantly, like, those principles are bad, but when it costs taxpayers money in a pandemic and when it actually caps the number of workers who can work on these projects instead of having more and more workers cashing a paycheck, it's crazy. It's crazy. And the estimates range. The low range estimate on the Patello Bridge was from Claire Trevena. She said she thinks it adds 7%, this union-only monopoly, which, 7%, that doesn't sound bad. That's like PST, 7%. Yeah. Except Maclean is $1.5 billion project. So 7% is like a high school. Like, you could build a high school for that overrun, right? And it's not 7%. We know from looking at these other projects, it's closer to 30%. And that is a significant amount of money that should be going into other infrastructure across the province at a time where we desperately need it. And look, UBC Subway, or Arbutus Subway, it's another one of these CBA projects. It's not in the ground yet. I don't sense there's a big groundbreaking company coming. I mean, I guess it will at some point right before we go to the polls, because Oregon won't want to cut a ribbon on something, like golden shovel something. But, if you want to know why you don't have a new Massey tunnel coming, it's because they've taken that money and essentially pilfered away on all these other projects by paying too much for labor.
And if you're watching this or listening to this and you're hearing this and you're saying, well, Jordan's with, he's with construction, and so, obviously he's got a different take on this. The numbers are not in question. Even the NDP will concede that, yes, the community benefit agreements are more expensive. They just are. And so when they commission polling on it, it's never, do you support extra cost? It's always, well, do you support hiring minorities and training apprentices and all these things, sort of implying that doesn't happen already. But as I think this was Les Lane's piece, that kind of that kind of thing has been happening in the construction industry for years, which is a
82%.
good thing.
So 82% of apprentices,
Yeah.
this is the government's own stat, 82% of apprentices in British Columbia are working with open shop companies. So non-building trades unions. So the building trades unions say, oh, we train all the workers. No, you don't. 82% are actually with companies or with ICBA directly. ICBA is actually the largest single sponsor of trade apprentices in the province. But, that's why Horgan then pivots, oh, yeah, but completion rates. Well, that's nonsense too, because he never provides any stats. Like, show us the stats that your completion rates are so much better. We've seen the stats. They're pretty much even. Like, there's no difference. And just by sheer volume, the open shop is churning out, thousands and thousands more red seal workers every year than the unions are. So it's such, but like, look, the NDP, this is ideological. They grow up, like, from the cradle, they're taught this, right? Unions do the training, unions are the best jobs, employers are all evil, and this is kind of what comes back again and again. And they're indoctrinated. Most of the cabinet grew up, or worked for unions or worked for NDP causes, didn't own small businesses, didn't run their own shops or own companies. They come up through this labor movement, and this is what they think the world is like, and it's just not true. It may have been true in the 1970s. It's like 2020. Like, it's a long time since. And the problem now is it's wasteful at a time where we need to stretch every dollar out of government. That's why I don't understand. Like, there's talk that the hospital in Cowichan might be the first healthcare facility built under a union monopoly. The problem with that is Cowichan also needs an RCMP detachment. Cowichan also needs a high school. And you could fund both of those projects with the overrun you're going to pay on the hospital because you're overpaying for labor. And before people say, oh, Jordan, you're underpaying labor. No, not at all. Like, we do wage and benefit surveys. We can prove to you we pay the same, often more, especially for the talented workers. They get more into the open shop. The benefits are similar. Like, there's no difference between the two. The difference is the bureaucracy involved, the risk involved. Maclean, if you and I owned a construction company and we wanted to build part of this Highway 1 project and we weren't unionized, and we bid on it and we got the project, we would immediately have to fire every worker of ours that we wanted to have on the project. They would then have to go and get hired by a crown corporation spending $25 million a year built specifically for this purpose, who would then hire them, put them on a benefit plan, put them on a pension plan. They've lost all of theirs. We don't share our profits with them anymore. It's all now done through government. And then they get assigned from the government agency back to our project. And of course, we get a mix of the rabid union folks and then our own folks who actually know our systems and whatnot. Costs a lot of money, doesn't make a lot of sense. Those workers then will, if they come back to us at the end of the project, they've worked a year, like, you're not getting a lot of government pension out of that. Like, It doesn't make any sense at all. It's an old-fashioned 1970s model that, frankly, the NDP should have left there. And it's, I think, another self-inflicted wound. And look, ICBA, we'll talk about for the next year and a bit until the election. There are projects that could have been built, but weren't because the NDP decided to reward their friends and insiders.
What was that line? I think it was his name Matt Toner? He was an NDP candidate who then ran for the Greens afterwards, and he called them politicians from the 90s solving problems from the 70s. I think that was the line.
That's a good line. That's a good line. I'm going to use that. I'm going to rip that off. Politicians from the 90s.
I think.
Okay.
I will. I mean, I'm doing this off the cuff here.
Yeah.
But I believe it was Matt Toner who went on to hold some position within the Green Party.
And he's not wrong. Look, he's not wrong. Like, Meg's the chief of staff of the premier, and probably the most significant political force within the premier's office. Horgan himself, Adrian Dix, they were all political Rat Pack staffers in the 90s for Glenn Clark. They were indoctrinated into this world. This is how they see the world, but that doesn't actually mean that's how the world is. Like, you got to take off the orange-colored glasses and take a look and go, oh, wait a minute, 85% construction workers aren't involved in that. Sorry, building trades, if you actually wanted to work on these projects, you got to bid on them and you got to be more competitive than you are today.
That's true. You are going to be very busy tomorrow evening. This is actually kind of a cool thing that you'll be moderating. And when I first saw your tweet, I thought it was a provincial debate for local candidates. That's not what this is at all.
No, so I don't know how I find myself in these messes, but here I am. So Conservative Party of Canada, the BC Electoral District Associations, there's 42 federal ridings in British Columbia. They got together, the 42 Conservative ridings, and said, we don't feel like the party really understands the challenges facing British Columbia. We want to get these leadership candidates for a debate. So they've put together a debate, came up with their own questions. There's 8 questions, and they're BC-centric questions that I think will be really helpful for BC CPC members to actually figure out how to rank their ballot. The example is this, so Andrew Scheer, one of the big platforms, was killing the carbon tax. Mm-hmm. Well, killing Trudeau's carbon. Well, that's great, but in BC, we don't have Trudeau's carbon tax. We have, Gordon Campbell's carbon tax, which has now been, kind of perverted, frankly, by the NDP, taking away all the revenue neutrality. But there's a provincial carbon tax. So, you knock on the door and you talk to an undecided voter, and and Andrew Scheer stands for killing the carbon tax. The carbon tax is kind of baked in. It's been here 15 years. It's sort of baked into people's minds. And they're like, well, how can he? He didn't bring it in. I don't really understand. Carbon tax was here long before Trudeau, and it's going to be here long after. How is that thing? So it was clear that there was some disconnect between the party of Ontario and the party in BC. So they wanted to have a debate and ask them specific British Columbia questions. They invited all 4 leadership candidates. 3 of the 4 accepted. Peter MacKay did not accept. Team MacKay, it's not too late. It's Wednesday night, tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, July 8th. Call the organizers today, get in there, because we have now close to 2,000 people signed up and registered to view it. The vast majority, of course, CPC members, because who else would be interested at this point? And I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be done on Zoom. There'll be the 4 squares, and I'm a little, I think they'll probably be pretty polite and courteous to each other. This is Canada after all, and there's a lot of jockeying right now for second place votes, but I'm looking forward to it, and frankly, I'm looking forward to hearing their answers. There's a fisheries question, there's a forestry question, there's a affordable housing question specific to kind of the Vancouver, Victoria, Okanagan areas. There's some good questions that these EDAs have come up with, and I'll be curious what their answers are.
I think this is a really good idea. I'd like to see other parties do this, because you're absolutely right. BC issues, and not just BC issues. I imagine it's the same if you're in Atlantic Canada or I'm from Alberta, so the prairies, where the issues that are specific to the region get lost in national debates. And we already have what is really a Quebec debate. Yeah. So, if we're going to do these things by Zoom and you don't need to organize, national TV time and studios and all this stuff, it just makes sense. Yeah. To let people in British Columbia hear candidates, in this case of a party, to talk about the issues that actually matter to them. To me, this is a no-brainer, and it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, in my prep, I watched actually converted to MP3 and listened to it as a podcast, a debate they had in the GTO. Greater Toronto Riding Associations got together and said, look, there's some hardcore urban issues that you guys need to understand, and we want to ask you about. Everything from road pricing, which, not really a federal responsibility, but interesting, all the way, again, to affordable housing, clearly a big issue in Toronto as well. And it was smart. It forced the candidates to take a step back and, first of all, research those topics, come to some opinions on them, and then to articulate them to the people who are marking their ballot. I am a Conservative Party of Canada member. I'm Maclean, thank God this debate's come along, because I'm completely undecided. I'm told ballots are going to arrive in the mail this month, and you have to get them back by August 21st to Ottawa. So, sometime this month I'll be ranking my candidates. But I'm looking forward to this, because I need help. It's great. It's great to have them opposed to a carbon tax or whatever. But how does it actually work in the BC context? Do you understand the BC's issues? We have a self-professed grandson of British Columbia in the Prime Minister's office right now. I question whether he really does understand BC at all. BC is more than just the path for a pipeline to get to the coast. Yeah. We do have issues that we want to talk about. So, yeah, it'll be good. It'll be interesting. There's also a section where they get to ask each other questions. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the dynamic is there. Again, they all kind of jockey for each other's second place votes.
Last thing I want to talk about today is actually something that I hadn't thought about. And you brought this up off air, and my first reaction was no. But now I've been thinking about it.
That's what you always do to me off air. You're always, no.
No, Jordan. That's it. Wrong. Bad. But you asked about, the way the House has been running the last few days. By House, I mean the legislature, with a lot of the members asking questions and participating remotely, either from their offices or from their homes. And Mike Fernworth got asked asked this 2 weeks ago, basically, is this going to be the new normal going forward? And he said no, which is why I said no. And that the intention is always very much to have this be the place where the business of the province is conducted. What you brought up was something, it was actually more interesting. It's not an either or. It's well, could we do some? Yeah. Could it be available for some members to do some business remotely? And if we did make it possible, since the infrastructure is all there, it's all been installed, would it not be more appealing to, you mentioned young mothers, Minister Michelle Mungal, millennials, people running in places like, Revelstoke, Fort Nelson, where it's pretty damn hard.
You don't think Ellis Ross would love it? Ellis Ross would love it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So first of all,
it's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, first of all, Farney, what a dinosaur. No, I'm just kidding. I love Farney. Farney's the kind of NDPer that, everyone gets along with. Like, he's just a good human being. He's got crazy beliefs when it comes to, some left ideology, but Farney is no dinosaur. Anyways, Farney, listen to me. This could work. And look, we talk a lot about wanting to attract younger voters and younger candidates into the fold. And that's easy when, it's in Victoria, even Vancouver, and it's a hop, skip, and a jump away. Yep. But, for most, I'll share my own experience. Coleman retires, everyone assumes I'm going to jump into the nomination. But, the family calculus is huge. Like, I have a 17-year-old, I have a 14-year-old, and I have a 10-year-old. I don't want the 10-year-old's just getting interested. I don't want to miss the best 4 years of his life, right? Like, I want to be there for hockey and baseball and all this stuff. I don't want to be stuck in Victoria, 24/7, 5 days a week in order to do this. So,
and he's not exaggerating. The time commitment is massive.
It's massive. And, so let's take even from, what would be to be an MLA in Langley. You would Sunday night kiss your family goodbye, get on this, probably the 7 or 9 o'clock ferry, probably the 7 o'clock because you don't want to get in too late, get to the Marriott around 9:30 or 10, check in, dump your stuff in a room, sleep, get up for question period prep at 7 a.m. and off you go for your day. And then you're there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday afternoon, they close the session. There's a mad rush up island to the ferries, and we'll see you in the Pacific Buffet lineup. You're to your MLA colleagues, and sure enough, I think usually the 7 o'clock ferry, usually they're on, or 5 o'clock. Anyways.
One of the two. Or Helijet or Harbour Air in some cases.
Right, and then you get there Thursday night, you get home, you drive home, you're pulling in at about 9 o'clock, 9:30, your kids are already in bed. Your wife is shakes your hand and says, "Oh, welcome home," like you're a stranger. And then Friday morning, you're into your constituency work. Saturday, you've got the Canada Day Festival and the whatever other festivals you got to go to, and you get your barbecues, you got your coffee with the guys. Sunday, you go to church in the morning, and then off again. This is a hard schedule for a millennial parent to put their minds around. And, I sit here and I'm watching this experiment very keenly because I think to myself, okay, let's say COVID's gone, but you're Michelle Mungal, you've got a 2-year-old now running around the house, and you're in Cranbrook, right? She lives in Revelstoke, Cranbrook, Nelson? Nelson. She lives in Nelson. And, maybe the 2-year-old, it's the week that you're introducing him to daycare. Yeah. And so maybe you just want to be around for that week, but you're a minister of the Crown. But if you can Skype in or Zoom in or however they're doing it and not miss anything, still be able to vote, that makes a lot of sense to me. Carol James, perhaps she's traveling. She's a finance minister. Perhaps she travels to New York to pitch BC. Wouldn't it make sense, if there was a key vote coming up, to let her Zoom in for that vote? Like, if you have the infrastructure there and it's working. I also like the way they've kind of reformatted things. 3 days of kind of house sittings and then 2 days of estimates. That makes sense.
I like that too.
Especially if you can be at home. Like, if these guys can go home and do their estimates through the office. And I'm watching the debates, I'm watching question period. Yesterday there was an interesting question period. Joan Isaacs is at the Coquitlam MLA for the BC Liberals is at home or in her office in the riding. I'm not sure where Selena Robinson was. She may also have been in Coquitlam because that's her riding. She may have been in Victoria, but she was not
it's
in
hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah, she was not in the physical edge stuff. And they had a question, Joan asks a question, Selena answers it, kinda. It's not an answer period, it's question period. Joan goes back, and they go back and forth. I didn't see any difference between what happened there and what would have happened in the House if they had both been sitting, 2.5 sword lengths apart. So all this to say, maybe, just maybe, COVID's consuming a lot of time and energy, but at some point, maybe Farnworth, Mary Polak, Adam Olson, who I think, or Stein First knows now the House. Maybe they should sit down and talk about this. Like, could this be a sustainable model going forward? It doesn't have to be every session, but maybe certain sessions. Would that attract younger candidates, younger people to it? And would it attract a different kind of person who wants to run for office, but doesn't want to completely, cut themselves off from their constituency? And would it save a lot of wear and tear on people like Alice Ross, Jennifer from the North Island, Jennifer Rice. Yeah, Jennifer Rice. Michelle Mungal, McDonald, those guys. Like, it could save a lot of time.
I agree. What I would say to that is this: is that I think that being here should still be the default. Mm-hmm. And having been a staffer, I think of the staff and how difficult that would be. I mean, it's one thing to be working for Minister Michelle Mungal if she's here in Victoria, but if I'm living in Victoria, am I going to be expected to be in Nelson a lot if she's going to be there? Probably not. I don't see how that would work. But what you're saying has a lot of merit. And I think that they can work towards a system where all things being equal, you'll be here in Victoria, but things will not always be equal. In fact, for some, you mentioned people like Ellis Ross and the people out in the Kootenays, they'll be unequal more than others coming, like John Horgan driving in from Langford. Right. Carol James, who can walk, I believe, to the ledge. So, yeah, they'll be here a lot more just by definition. But the infrastructure is in place. And I think if the expectation is you'll be here normally, but we can work it out if you can't, and you can still represent your constituents and you can still do your job if you need to be home for whatever reason. Tracy Reddy's missed the last couple sessions because I think it's a broken leg. I don't want to get that wrong, but travel is essentially impossible, but still of sound mind.
Tracy, actually, I think it's a serious condition. So, in fact,
is it? I beg your pardon.
I'm not sure she's actually going to run again. I hope she does because she's brilliant. But that's a decision I think she's probably making now. But the question I have for you, Maclean, is like in the House, like how do they handle the votes? So, like question period, I can figure out estimates, I can figure out debates, I can figure out like, are they pressing buttons to vote remotely? Are they putting up hands?
A little of both. They if they're remotely, they just hold up a voting card, which is yes or no. And then Kate Ryan Lloyd, the clerk, and the acting clerk literally count them up. And there are people in the chamber who vote as well. Right. So they do both. And I don't believe there's been any glitches. There probably will be eventually, but I mean, there are mistakes when they're all voting here in person. Sure. Just last session, we had the speaker extend the deadline to get in because not everyone got in on time. And we've had other times where, a government almost fell because somebody took lunch. So, it's already happened. I mean, if somebody screws up by holding up yes instead of no on their voting card, is that really all that much different? Is that really any worse? I don't think so.
Yeah. From the staffer point of view, too, Maclean, I'd say this. ICBA, we worked remotely for many weeks. You find a way around it. Twitter's not bringing back all their staff into the office. They're working remotely. Like, there are ways to work remotely and still be very effective, as most people watching this have probably know and have done at some point in the last 3 months, 4 months. So, you could have your Microsoft Teams call with your minister in the morning and kind of work your way through the day. It's obviously not ideal, but it's just one of these thoughts I had. Like, if this is working well, maybe we should consider it as a way to try to attract younger people into the process, especially. It sounds terrible, but young moms. I
couldn't agree more.
The one thing about COVID is, and I think years from now we'll look back, this has been really tough on young women and mothers specifically. The employment stats don't lie. This has been hard, and moms bear the brunt of a lot of the childcare decisions, things like that, schooling. This has been tough on them. So, anything we can do to kind of change that dynamic, I think we should take a look at. So there you go. Andrew Wilkinson has daughters. I know that I watched him at a BC Liberal convention once tear up talking about, equality of opportunity for women as well. Maybe this is something to think about in a platform going forward as part of your, democratic reform and also finding more way to bring younger people and women into the process.
Well, the system is getting the acid test as we speak. In fact, literally as we speak. I don't know if you can actually overhear the bells on I'm wearing the Mickey Mouse headset, so you probably can't. But we're about to have another virtual question period in about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So I will go and attend it in real life. But until then, and until next week, you can follow us at the Orca BC. I'm at Maclean K. This is at Jordan Bateman. And of course, there's always the mothership, theorca.ca. Until then, happy politics.